Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Nightcrawler. This film came out in 2014. It was directed by Dan Gilroy. I don't know, I felt like reviewing a film that deals with media sensationalism, particularly kind of the angle of it bleeds, it leads, which, is a mentality that has existed as a hot topic for sure at certain points in culture, but I think more in the mid to late 20th century. I did see this film initially when it came out, and I remember not caring for it, but being intrigued by certain things, liking certain aspects of it. But I had always planned to watch it again, so here is my chance. Gilroy has written and co-written all kinds of projects, but this was his directorial debut. And based on, what I've learned about him, I do think it was kind of a passion project, a labor of love, and I think he's a tactful sort of guy. It's like he found a formula that he knows can work very well if it's pulled off correctly. He's taking kind of the taxi driver angle and updating it for a modern generation in terms of the protagonist here. And this is a neo-noir thriller that is tinged with a lot of artificiality and a lot of that kind of like trash news TV sort of feel. You can practically smell the E-Entertainment spray tan. But yes, Taxi Driver is, major fundamental framework here, and certainly elements of King of Comedy, and I would just say postmodern elements of 1970s movies. But also we have satirical elements, black comedy, and there's a kind of a network feel for sure. The character of Nina definitely reminded me of like Faye Dunaway in that movie, kind of that alpha female, which does provide an interesting counterpoint to the main character who has the alpha in him, but in a different way that is quite deceptive to her. So all of that I think is very interesting. But yeah, I do look at this movie as very much intentionally trying to be simple in concept. It's definitely not rich and deep and all of that. It's more a vehicle, I think, for the central performance. And that central performance, of course, being performed by Jake Gyllenhaal. No matter what you feel about the character, whether you like him or you don't like him, you do have to acknowledge, I think, that he is quite compelling and he's very well written. And you want to follow him. You want to be invested in his story. And this is a performance that fully achieved, I think, everything that it set out to do. It is a fantastic kind of showy performance that is an actor's dream. And I do think it works, or the character works more as a generalized archetype, because we know very, very little about him. He just sort of floats through the story, and he's almost like a ghost that's just kind of lurking in the shadows of downtown Los Angeles at night, very much like a wolf. If only the rest of the movie had that same kind of magnetism that he has, though, and had a lot more of that cinematic richness, dimension to kind of balance it out a little bit. Though I have to say, as a piece of entertainment, it's a really tight script. It's a great performance at the center. It's fun. I got a kick out of it. I love that he's kind of standing for a type of person, a self-made type of person. Of course, he's playing a character who discovers that he really likes filming crime scenes. So he starts getting there before the cops and before other media. And so he gets all these amazing shots and amazing video footage. And naturally, local news wants a piece of that. But it's such a specific character in the way that he's written. And it's a character that never could have existed maybe 20 years ago. The character would have been very, very different. He's a product of a certain era and kind of a representation of the changing entrepreneurial landscape. I love how off everything is, and just that weird contradictory thing that, yes, this person is quite scary in a lot of ways, and he looks full on like a psychopath, and yet the contradiction is there is a boyishness to him. He's Jake Gyllenhaal. He has that about him, has a likability to him. And, as the character, he even almost has like an effeminate quality. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it's something that I notice. He just has a very kind of careful way that he holds himself, very measured out. And yet, again, there's also the contradiction of there's just a seething mania that you can feel just in his face. And it's just kind of flickering. You get senses of it. When you look at this person, he could just be sitting on the couch, and you look at his face and it's like, this guy could be plotting a serious, serious murder, or maybe he's just thinking about what he's gonna buy at the grocery store. And yet neither one eases my feelings. And his eyes are just so reptilian and they're wired, and it almost looks like he's addicted to meth or something. Or perhaps, it's just, he looks almost like somebody who's been looking at computer screens his whole life, or maybe staying up all night and just looking at a screen. So he's absolutely a product of the society that he grew up in, very manufactured in the way that, he talks and the way he moves and everything. Certainly not fully in touch with the primal side of himself, and yet that does reveal itself in just very different ways than maybe you might be used to. There is a dominance to him. I think there is a violence, or at least an aggression in his personality, but not in a literal way. When you're making something that has a cynical concept that shows maybe the darker side of the American dream, I think it would be expected for somebody like this to reveal himself to be this crazy psychopath and go at a killing spree at the end, like Travis Bickle. For me, that really is the key to the character, is that the violence isn't created in the normal ways. He is observing. Sure, he's tampering with things, he's enhancing sensationalism, but he's not causing the sensationalism in the ways that we're used to. And I think it's a perfect representation of the times that we live in. Because when you look at somebody like Travis Bickle and in Taxi Driver, he resorts to violence, but it's a different time, and it's due to more complicated circumstances, or I should say a different set of circumstances. Yes, there is loneliness, there is lack of direction, but the film is also very much taking place in a post-Vietnam world, and he is a Vietnam veteran. That is very clear at the beginning of the film. And so it's like there's remnants of violence and that existential sort of feeling in the air that exists in America as they're trying to move on. Here, the violence is not so much created out of nihilism, it's more just commonplace, and that's such a strange thing. It's less direct, it's more used as entertainment, it's business, it is opportunity for our main character. He wants to further his success, but not once does he think, oh, this could be maybe a bad thing. I kind of wish that all those elements, though, when it comes to the observation of violence and making it more commonplace, I wish that element had kind of existed more in the script, or they had done a little bit more with it. Because I think it's a really haunting center of the film. I just love his lack of empathy. It's just wonderful, because there is no trace of anything that isn't fully manipulation or something that is manufactured. Or also, this is not a typical anti-hero downfall. We're so used to seeing that sort of thing. But this is kind of refreshing. This is a story, again, it's about triumph. And like I said, this is a story that chooses to reward the protagonist, and it chooses, for the most part, not to judge him. And I like that they don't judge him as well, because I think that had they done that, they would have limited the concept and how it relates to the changing social landscape. His character also isn't tested in the ways that you'd think, nor is his arc particularly dramatic or well-defined. And yeah, sure, there are limitations to that, but at the same time, I do find it quite interesting. The normalization of a certain type of living and certain type of actions, and a type of sensationalism becoming an empire. I think my favorite scene is the scene in the restaurant with Nina, just because she has a very grab 'em by the balls kind of alpha female mentality, but suddenly she is taken aback by this very, very strange and direct person that she's sitting with, and you're wondering all kinds of things, all kinds of emotions are going on beneath the surface, and you're thinking, like, is she turned on? Is she creeped out? Is she in a terrifying situation where it's like, I'm in a bad situation and I may have gotten myself in too deep, now I don't know how to get out of it? All these questions are going on in my mind, and I don't know, I think character dynamics and scenes like that are very important in a script that is this tight. I also really like the scenes with Riz Ahmed quite a bit. I think he's my favorite character, aside from Jake Gyllenhaal, of course, because he's the perfect counterpoint to that lack of empathy that we're so used to in Jake Gyllenhaal, because he's pure empathy by contrast, and he represents, unfortunately, a type of character that is doomed from the start. But we really do crave that pathos in a defined arc, because Riz Ahmed's character has a full arc. He starts out one way and becomes someone very different by the end, and it is quite satisfying, where that is lacking from our main character. He becomes our anchor for morality that we start to judge others against, and that's all in the climax of the film. And naturally it's very tragic, because this is a very cynical story, and he's going to be lost in a very cynical way. I wish there had been more of that. I wish, maybe a little bit more of him had been incorporated into the film. I also have to admit that I do struggle a bit with the story itself. Just the way, the story about news sensationalism in this particular way, where they're filming gruesome crime scenes and then taking it to local news. I don't know if that's particularly relevant in these times. This feels like a script that would have worked better, or it seems like a script that might have been written in maybe the 1980s or even the 1990s. Because the idea of gore, especially in our news now, I think it's a lot more watered down and more saturated than it's ever been. we've grown, I think, a lot softer when it comes to sensationalism. And I don't know, like I can see it working more in the 80s, because that would have been, after the 70s, the 60s, it's like, echoes of the Vietnam War, in a time when, the images of war were on TV sets all across America. And we weren't used to that sort of thing. Seeing brutal images like that, I don't know, that just makes more sense. So it just fits there. Or you could take, this story and make it more about kind of the way media is changing rapidly, and how naturally when that happens, people start to crave more salacious things. Like the way they mix kind of sex and violence and all of that in a movie like Videodrome. Now that is a much more ambitious story, much more art house, I think, in style, but also a very tight script. So it's absolutely possible. And I'm not saying that I want some like artsy experimental thing here. I'm not looking for like Crash by Cronenberg or anything like that. I just wanted maybe just a little bit more dimension to it, a little bit more complexity. So that way the themes can resonate within the character and around the character. It's going to really kind of make him more interesting as well. And he's already, very magnetic. But there is a part of me that is fine with the idea of it being very simple, and it's not necessarily meant to be taken realistically, because, there's not much logic in this movie. There's a lot of silliness for sure that can take you out of it. But I think it's the shamelessness and the lack of richness, that is also very on brand, and it fits the mood, and it's part of the point. This just feels like a really dated way to express the changing media landscape in 2014, at a time when like Twitter was starting to become bigger and bigger. I just think it's way off the mark. But at the same time, I can look at the story in a different way. Maybe it's more a metaphor for the interchangeability of like silly, news stories that you could just throw away, like a viral cat video that comes out right next to like a story of like a city being bombed. It's like, but they both kind of come out in the same way, and we palette them the same way. So stuff like that, I think, is very interesting, the way we're kind of numb to certain types of sensationalism. I'm just not sure necessarily if it's working in this particular story, because those postmodern films that this film, I think, is inspired by has more of a power to it, and something more confident and dynamic about what it's trying to say. And so I guess I wanted a little bit more of that, because I think this film could have really, really been fantastic. But I also like to consider that this is a first feature film for this person. And so it's like, naturally, they're going to work out their style more and more, hopefully. This has some beautiful shots of Los Angeles at night, really, really gorgeous, but I don't know if they're quite plunging you into an experience like I want. I think this film kind of keeps you a little bit at a distance in a way that I craved more from. I don't feel quite submerged in Jake Gyllenhaal's world either. I get that there's a disconnect to the character, but I think we need to be very much kind of on his shoulder in a sense. We need to be feeling that isolation, and we need to feel more disconnected from the city and disconnected from the people in an interesting way. So those are all things that hopefully the creativity he's played with a little bit more. But yes, I do think this is enjoyable. If you haven't seen it, and especially if you're a fan of somebody like Jake Gyllenhaal, this is really entertaining, but also I genuinely think it's one of his better performances. And I think he was really creative in the way that he did it. And I really like when you have a really famous actor, especially one who's like very good looking and charming and all of that, and they go to these places and they really have fun with it. So yeah, if that sounds up your alley, then you got a movie to watch. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support and everything. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.